Today we're making an American pumpkin pie recipe, very flavorful, which we'll balance with a spoonful of fresh whipped cream. Hi, I'm Robert, and today's recipe will give us a tart with a 26 cm diameter, about 1.4 kilograms. We'll start with the pumpkin, which needs to be baked. I'm using this kind of pie pumpkin because I think it turns out better. Simply cut it. If you have this part of the pumpkin, remove the seeds with a spoon or something. I'll drizzle them with a bit of oil and bake them in the oven at 200 Celsius for about an hour or until they're very soft. Now, if your pumpkin pieces are thicker, you'll either need to keep longer in the oven or cut them into smaller pieces so they bake faster, obviously. While the pumpkin is baking, we can calmly take care of the crust. For that, I put 300 grams of flour, 15 grams of sugar and 3 grams of salt into a food processor, but you can also do this in a stand mixer or a regular bowl by hand. I mixed them a bit, then added 150 grams of cold butter cut into cubes and pulsed everything until it became sandy in texture. As I said, you can do this with a stand mixer or by hand. If you're doing it by hand, I recommend washing your hands in cold water first to cool them down so you don't melt the butter too much. Don't overprocess or knead the butter into the flour because we don't want to turn the mixture into a paste. We want small butter bits coated in flour. I transferred the mixture into a smaller bowl and now I'll slowly add cold water while kneading by hand. Again, not too much water and not too much kneading, just until the dough starts to come together. Once the dough forms, shape it into a disc, wrap it in plastic wrap and refrigerate it for at least half an hour, ideally an hour, so it cools down well. Or you can do this quickly in 5 minutes in the evening and leave the dough overnight in the fridge. This is the glass dish I'll use for the tart. You can use whatever dish you want, of course. I chose this because it's not very deep and I like the tart to be a bit shallower, but again, use whatever you prefer. The dough has been chilled and is ready. I made one in advance, so I have it ready now. On a surface dusted with a little flour to prevent sticking, I'll roll out the dough. My dish is 26 cm, so the dough should be about 30 cm in diameter to make it easier to fit into the dish. I'll show you a little trick to help you center it perfectly. Roll it out enough so it will cover the entire dish, including the sides. The easiest way to center the dough perfectly is to fold it into quarters. Of course, if there's excess flour on it, brush it off gently with a pasty brush. Don't leave it on the dough because it will give the crust an unpleasant texture when you eat the tart. So I folded the dough in quarters, placed it into the dish with the tip of the triangle in the center, and when I unfold it, it's perfectly centered. No more struggling around to adjust it evenly on all sides. Pretty simple. Make sure it's pressed well along the edges so it lines the sides of the dish nicely. Then with the scissors, trim the excess dough, but leave a little hanging over the edge. You'll see why in a moment. This dough tends to shrink a bit during baking, so we want it to come slightly above the edge of the dish to hold its shape and not collapse. Now, shape the edge nicely. Use 2 fingers from one hand and 1 finger from the other to make a flatted border, however you like. Just pinch lightly to create a wavy ridges around the tart. After you finished arranging the crust, place it in the fridge again for 30-45 minutes so the dough chills well. Once the pumpkin is baked, meaning when a knife slides in easily, let it cool and peel off the skin. I didn't film this part because it's messy and it's better if everyone does it calmly in their own kitchen. Then, again, I'll use the same food processor, but you can use a hand blender or if you don't have one, simply press it through a fine sieve. The idea is to get a very smooth pumpkin puree. As I said, I'll blend it with a food processor and in a few seconds it will be ready. The tart crust has chilled, so it's time to bake it. First, cover it with parchment paper and add some weight on top so it doesn't puff up. I'm using some rice I've already used a few times. You can see it's brownish, already baked. You can also use beans or even special baking weights. This broken rice is cheap which is why I use it. The idea here, as I said, is to press down the crust so it doesn't rise while baking. The alternative would be to poke holes in the bottom of the crust so the trapped air can escape, but for this tart, since the filling is quite liquid, we can't do that. The filling will leak through. So this is the technical solution we use instead. Just make sure the parchment paper goes all the way to the edge and the rice, or whatever you use, is spread evenly to weigh it down everywhere. We'll bake for 15 minutes at 200 Celsius, no fan. Then remove the parchment paper and rice and bake another 10 minutes at the same temperature, still no fan. The crust is baked, so we move on to the filling. For the filling I use a tall jug like this because it's easy to use an immersion blender in them. 640 grams of pumpkin puree. I had quite a lot left, and you can store the rest in an airtight container in the fridge or even freeze it for months. You can portion it out so that one bag is exactly enough for one tart, 640 grams. Then add 600 grams of sweetened condensed milk over the puree. In another bowl I added 1 egg yolk, 3 whole eggs and the spices. Here you can adjust the spices to your taste, but the idea of this tart is that it should have a very strong flavor. I used 3 grams of salt, 3 grams of ground ginger, 5 grams of cinnamon, 1 gram of nutmeg and 5 grams of vanilla. Whisk them a bit and added them over the pumpkin and condensed milk mixture. Now to mix everything well, as I said, I find the hand blender easiest to use, but you can also whisk by hand or stir well until it's perfectly smooth. The thing about the spices is that they tend to clump, which is why I prefer the hand blender. Pour the mixture into the tart shell and bake for an hour at 160 Celsius, no fan. The idea is that the center should remain slightly soft, like a cheesecake. Move the dish gently and the center of the tart or pie should still be a little wobbly. After it's baked, turn off the oven and leave the tart inside with the door closed for about 15 minutes. Then slowly open the door for another 15 minutes. After that, open the door a bit more and leave the tart in there another 15 minutes and so on. The idea is that the cooling should happen gradually, because otherwise the filling cracks and the tart won't look as nice. Done. Baked and cooled. This is how the tart looks once it's completely cooled. You just slice a piece. It's a bit hard to remove from the glass dish because of the wide surface area, and I like to serve it with a spoonful of fresh, unsweetened whipped cream, because the tart itself is already quite sweet and the freshness of the cream balances the intense flavor beautifully. For more recipes like this, don't forget to like, subscribe to my channel and follow me on Instagram for lots of useful tips.